A lot of Trump's co-defendants are either attorneys or former politicians, but one man is actually still in office right here in Georgia.
Gurveer Denza joins us now with more on that to explain.
Megan, Lana, good morning to both of you. Norcross Republican State Senator Shawn Still is accused of serving as a fake elector in 2020. Under Georgia law, Governor Kemp is required to wait 14 days before appointing a commission that will review Senator Still's case. That commission will be made up of Republican Attorney General Chris Carr, a lawmaker from the state House, and also one from the state Senate. Those three will then have another 14 days to issue a written report that could recommend Senator Still be suspended. Now, we should have an answer as to whether he is going to be suspended by sometime in mid-September. Meanwhile, Senator Still also serves on the Education and Youth Senate Committee. That happens to have a meeting tomorrow morning. Lana?
All right, Gurveer, thanks so much for that. And hey, if you want to know the second there's another development in this, or you just want to watch our live coverage when Trump does turn himself in, download the free Atlanta News First app.